Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're here celebrating Ousmane K. Power-Greene's debut novel, The Confessions of Matthew Strong.
Yes.
All right. We need a little noise. We're here with Amber Butts as well. It's going to be joining us on the conversation. I think this is a really great pairing. I'm very excited to be this time to say. Also, today is publication day, so we're all
Good day.
We're all here. So thank you for being here with us in store tonight. Thank you for the people online joining us. We appreciate it. Let us know in the chat where you're tuning in from. We love to hear it. It's very exciting for us. I'll keep my business very brief. I'm very grateful that you're here joining us in an independent bookstore in the year 2022. We appreciate it. Thank you so much if you've already purchased The Confessions of Matthew Strong. We appreciate that. It helps support us as a bookstore. It supports this author who put so much time and work and blood, sweat, and tears into making this book. So it does not go unnoticed. We always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. And just tiny bit of business, please keep your masks on between sips of beverage. I know it's kind of odd just because we're trying to move forward more safely during the pandemic that's still going on, but we also want to be celebratory, so please do imbibe with what you like, but this is our compromise, so thank you for being cool about it. We appreciate it. And we also want to give these two on like the grace to take their masks off, so we appreciate it. And without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce these two that are joining us. First, on my right, Amber Butts is a storyteller, cultural strategist, grief worker, and scholar of delight. Amber's practices are rooted in building reparative, joyful, and interdependent relationships between the living earth and all of its beings. Her role as a speaker, listener, and beginner have taught her that spaces centered in tenderness, nuance, and care are freedom playgrounds. Amber lives in Oakland and is currently at work on an intergenerational speculative fiction novel. Do find out more about Amber at her work. I recommend you visit her website, amberbutts.com. Let's make some noise for Amber.
All right.
And last but most certainly not least, Ousmane K. Power-Greene is the Program Director of Africana Studies and an Associate Professor of History at Clark University. Power-Greene is the author of Against Wind and Tide, the African-American Struggle Against the Colonization Movement, and his writing appears in the Harlem Renaissance Revisited, Politics, Arts, and Letters. He's been featured on All Things Considered, C-SPAN Book TV, and NPR's history podcast, Throughline. His debut novel, The Confessions of Matthew Strong, is the reason we are here tonight. Please make some noise for this novel.
Well, it's been a long time coming, and being here at Green Apple Books on Book Celebration Day, I have to say the only other place I'd be is the local bookstore in my town. That I joke with them, you know, and I'm sure if I live in San Francisco, it'll be the same way with here. Is like when I'm not, you know, doing things that I'm doing, I'm usually in some bookstore trying to talk myself out of buying books. As my family often say. But just, I thought I'd read a little bit from the book, but most interestingly, what I'm excited about, being able to be in dialogue about the work, because being, of all the art forms, long fiction is a tough one in terms of feedback, because A, it's hard, because, you know, people are reading pieces of it, and so now that it's sort of available, people can read the whole thing, sort of be in dialogue and be a conversation. So I have a person here who actually had made her way through it, and I'm really looking forward to what interests Amber and you know how we can dig a little deeper, you know, into the book for those that haven't had a chance to read it online and here, and hopefully it'll be the beginning of a conversation, not the end, because so much in this book, you know, you make creative choices. You live with these characters, and there are aspects of their lives that just don't ultimately make it in the book. And so, you know, I'm really looking forward to where our paths go in terms of the conversation. So, why not? I'll start by reading the beginning. I will try to read slowly, and I certainly can't compete with the professional reader who did the Audible book. And so, I'm close enough to the mic. So there are people online. All right, present day. My name is Allegra Douglas. I am one of the survivors. My story may make you angry, not necessarily at me, but the reason things happened the way they did. Only looking back can I put the pieces together in a coherent manner, or at least in a way that makes any sense at all. Many newspaper publishers and magazines beg me to tell this story, but I have no desire for the media to frame my story as one of progress from the days Klan night riders paraded openly down 16th Street in Birmingham. I refuse to let them profit from the kidnap and torture of Black girls. I wouldn't tell them what Matthew Strong confessed to me when I was trapped in that plantation home and forced to write his white supremacist mission to redeem the South. I refuse to make him more well known than men like Charles Manson, so publishers could make a fortune and he would go down in history as some modern day Nathan Bedford Forrest. At least that's what I told everyone who asked. But what is the truth? The truth is that I feared having my name forever associated with Matthew Strong. And I feared after people read my story, they would sympathize with this mission, even if they deplored his methods. And this is exactly what he wanted. There were those who never believed I'd remain steadfast in my determination to withhold my story from the public. Some assumed when I finally accepted what happened, I'd be ready to speak. Others shadowed my posts online, waiting like dogs for me to toss a bone, trying to anticipate when I'd break my silence. But one thing is for certain, all the talk in the world won't change anything. So why have I decided to tell you this now? Maybe it's because of something my grandmother used to say, let your faith be greater than your fear. Of course, she meant this from a Christian perspective, an entire system of beliefs I had abandoned when I entered college. I may still question the whole Jesus died for your sins. On the third day he was resurrected, he ascended into heaven and will come again to judge the living and the dead thing. But now I find St. Paul's claim that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen, to be a guiding principle. Maybe my fears force me to have faith that what I say will change the course of events, unfolding just how Matthew Strong said they would. As a philosopher, I'm drawn to problems. I'm fascinated by the relationship between ideas and actions. Ideas are behind our motivations, ideas beneath our fears. Yet some ideas, however, take you down paths best left unexplored, ground best left undisturbed. Shortly after I was liberated from the plantation home where Matthew Strong and his men held me and the 11 other Black women and girls, I remember an FBI agent saying in nearly every case, a perpetrator like Strong would kill his hostages rather than allow them to tell their story. Since the FBI rescued me, whenever I hear a Southern accent, memories of my abduction return like mosquitoes at sunset, hovering over my arm, darting through my fingers, daring me to slap so they can laugh and dash, laugh and dash. And that's how my memories come back to me. The first time after I heard a man's voice at my favorite coffee shop. Another time when I came out of my apartment and stumbled into a UPS delivery man. Then I'm there again, feeling my legs go numb, my mind distorted by whatever drug they drugged me with. I hear the man who said he came to protect me ask if I feel strange. The ends of his words clipped like he was speaking to a fan. I glance at him and his concerned face melts into a cocky grin. Now he's laughing. They were all laughing, laughing, laughing. Next, I feel them lift me through the air like a suitcase before pushing me in the trunk. Keys click. The car engine revs. Windshield wipers slap against the glass, rapid beeping, and then I black out. When I woke, I had no idea how long I'd been driving or where we were. Had we left Alabama? Were we in Mississippi? At one point, we stopped and I had to go to the bathroom badly. I tapped the trunk with my knuckles in the silence. I was desperate. I banged harder. Finally, I heard feet crunching over. If you keep banging, we're going to have to give you more medicine. You wouldn't want that now, would you? I have to go to the bathroom. There was a pause. Then I heard a beep and the trunk opened. Two masked men stood over me, one with the drawn pistol. The other held a machine gun strapped against his back. I had pulled down my blindfold, but they insisted I put it back on before they lifted me out of the trunk. Where are we? They said nothing as they walked me across the gravel to the bushes. Go here. Can I at least take my blindfold off? I heard whispering, then I felt the barrel of the gun against my back as one untied it. I squinted, my eyes adjusting to the light. I pulled down my pants and squatted. As I peed, I noticed a stretch of pine trees rising up the mountain range, but it was impossible for me to tell if we'd driven east of the Appalachian Mountains or south of the Oak Mountains. Think, Allie. One of them jabbed the gun against my back. Keep your eyes on the leaves, you'll be pissing with the blindfold on. He surveyed the woods as if he feared someone would jump out and rescue me. Or was he trying to give me some respect? How ridiculous. For a moment, I considered running. That would be stupid. I had no idea where I was. They would shoot me anyway. I pulled my pants up and one took my arm and the other pressed the gun to my back again. I pleaded with them as the third one blindfolded me. Please, I'll pay you. My husband and I have money. One of them laughed. I hated myself for begging, but that was all I had. Wait, please, I shouted as they tied my hands behind my back and shoved me back in the trunk. We drove for a while and then stopped. Doors opened and closed and the trunk popped open and a flashlight shined through my blindfold. I felt hands again lift me out, then they marched me across a stretch of grass. Tears slipped beneath my blindfold. I tried to prevent myself from sobbing. They were not tears of sadness or even fear, although of course I was scared. They were tears of frustration. I allowed myself to be caught off guard. I let him outsmart me. I heard a door squeak and they escorted me into a room. When they sat me in a chair, they untied the blindfold. I glanced up, blinking, hazy, and an arm dropped over my shoulder, pulling the face like a over. I didn't need to see his face to know what it was. That ends the first chapter.
Yeah.
So where do we go from there? We know she survived, honestly, because she's telling the story.
I'm just so grateful to like actually have read the book and like get into it right now with you. One of my questions really is like, how did Allie come to you?
Yep. Yeah, that's it.
And like when, where were you? What were you doing?
Yeah, so I actually handwrite my first drafts.
Yes.
And so because of that, I know exactly where I was. July 15th, 2007, I was actually, I was at camp, but I was on like a day off. I was in Barnes & Noble actually, and I sat down with my notebook and I just started writing, and I was writing, sort of thinking about the story and just literally just, people, Matthew Strong came to me and I was interested in him. And as I was sort of free writing, I was just thinking about who my heroine was going to be, because obviously I want to read a story about white supremacists. It's like you need a main character, and then immediately Angela Davis came to my mind, and so she was the inspiration for Alec Douglas from pretty much day one, minute, whatever. I've always read Angela Davis's work, and I taught her autobiography, and pitting a person like this character Matthew Strong, who fashions himself as a sort of pseudo philosopher, with an actual philosopher, right, one of our great icons, to me seemed like a great pair for the story. And so my publisher thought she's a psychoanalyst, so she was like, "Oh, so you wrote this? She's French. You wrote this woman character," and she started. I was like, sorry to break it to you, but actually, the choice was really because I wanted to send it around Angela Davis and take it from there.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I felt very connected to Allie, but also like Allie's grandmother.
Yes.
Mrs. Maggie or something like that.
Yeah.
And then Allie's sister Janice. Tell us about those relationships.
Yeah. So, all right. So one of the things I'm thinking about when you ask that is just sort of like my own, family, my connection to my grandmother. So the novel is dedicated to my two grandparents. My grandmother was born in Alabama, and then when she was an infant, her actual mother died in childbirth, and so she was raised by her father, her older sister. She's the youngest, she had much older sisters. And so I was, really interested in tapping into that relationship between, sort of this character and the grandmother. And my mother was raised by her grandma. And so early iterations, I was aware that the relationship between Allie's mother, which she doesn't know, was going to be important to the book. And that family dynamic, her sister is a great character. She's supportive, but she doesn't get Allie's philosophy, intellectual stuff. And so my main character, Allie's relationship with her sister, is a lot of it is sort of about coming home and trying to build relationships that she sort of fled from Alabama to sort of get this job as a philosopher in the academy. And I was interested in exploring that dynamic. I mean, I'm a person that's very close to my family and my mom and my grandparents, and so in that sense, and they've been supported by my sort of academic pursuits, but this sort of narrative of Black academics, particularly from the South, really longing for sort of to get away and to sort of not be stifled is something that writers like Alice Walker, for example, talks a lot about in that memoir, and sort of trying to find that balance, even though writing through that really deep connection that she has with her work and with Mississippi. And so those are some of the ways into it, and then it's just a process of sort of like writing and redrafting and thinking about Janet's family and how Allie would find her way back and reconnect with them.
Yeah, I hear that. I loved seeing the relationships. I think for me, my family's from the South too, from Alabama and Louisiana. And so there's just certain aspects of like familial culture and like relationships that sometimes get distorted through space.
Yeah.
So like I'm in Oakland, some of my family's in Alabama, there are just like pressures in those relationships. And I think like you write that really well. And you did it in a way for me as like someone who reads very often and is also a writer, but also reads all the time. You write Black women really well. I was like, because I read a lot of books and I read books by a lot of Black folks who sometimes can struggle with writing Black women well. Tell us a little bit about like, you dedicated this book to your grandmothers. They sound amazing. What really kind of kept you grounded in writing these women, especially?
Yeah, so those of us who are students of the Black literary tradition know that our foremothers, our great writers, are Black women. I have consistently, and particularly through this process, always returned to the memoirs. I mean, particularly Angela Davis and Assata Shakur, are two books I teach regularly. And so a lot of my process was, really reading a lot, really thinking about their from sentence structure to just like literally, mimicking and trying to imitate that. And also a lot of the interviews. So, in my courses, particularly Eyes on the Prize, I teach a lot regularly. And, a lot of other people, they haven't heard of Eyes on the Prize, which can be shocking for our generation. And so, through my process, really, thinking about and listening to the storytelling style, and it was really important to me trying to do it. But at the same time, it's like anything else. The success is when you do it. So like, having, my mom literally read and capture every word more than once at the kitchen table. Having my friend, my Black women friends read and helping me figure out what's working, what's not, what's realistic, what's not, was instrumental. We don't, there's a myth that people have, which is unfortunate, that they don't meet enough writers who talk about, the fact that you don't write a book in isolation. You have a community, people read it, they give you feedback. And any success that it has is only because people read it and give you feedback and help you find what in there is realistic, et cetera. And so, so that was how I did it. But you saying that actually, again, the more people who aren't my friends and family who say that I've success, caption it successfully makes me feel more and more like, perhaps I did because, I mean, although I have to say my friends and family, they keep it real all the time. So it's not like they're going to hold back. But there's always that little sense as a writer, that people are just going to, oh yeah, they like it. But so it's great, every time I hear that I have successfully, and I've told people who've asked, when I've been interviewed, I say, the second people stop seeing me and they see Ali Douglas is the success. That's the success. You can't fabricate that. Like the moment it's not Ousmane and you're in it, is a success, and you only know that when people pick it up and those defining, they find that to be the case. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things for me too is that you are writing about different Black women and girls.
Yeah.
So it's not even just that you write Ali Douglas well, but the grandmothers, the missing girls, the missing women, Cynthia, who's one of the characters in the book, Janice. So in a lot of ways, there could have been an iteration of your book where Janice, who's the sister of Ali, Janice and Ali are like kind of pitted against each other.
Yeah.
But there's a breaking point. There's like a reconciliation that happens in the process of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so when I started thinking of Ali and just sort of like, connecting and thinking about building out her world, because, early iterations it was not in a sort of as much of a narrative. It was much more of a split up, and it was different. It was letters and it was Ali's narrative. And so there wasn't as much opportunity to really think about the other characters. And so as I began to build the novel out, and her daughter, so Ali's niece, so Janet's daughter is Niquatia. And I have been working for 23 summers with, boys for 15 of those summers, and then girls for 6 or 7. So, sort of being a community and thinking about a lot of people I've met and worked with, and then just like, just loving kids and loving sort of people and teenage and just people I've worked with and taught. I actually had a student named Niquatia, and I love that name. I taught her she was a 9th grader. I love that name, and I can't believe this book is coming out. I'm like, I gotta find her now. This was like 99. I need to find Niquatia if you're there. No, because the thing is that Niquatia, she was 14, so she was a freshman when I taught her at Amherst High School, and she was just so wise and also smart and challenging in all the ways that one can be, who's smart and sophisticated and when you're teaching high school. And she was great. She was an inspiration, for me. And I really, looked at sort of some of the ways in which people didn't really understand her. And so I just, when I thought of the character, I was like, okay, in the novel, Niquatia's younger, but anyway, so those are some of my thinking around my characters and people who I've known, and just how much they've influenced me thinking about. I mean, no one's ever the same. Like, it's, I don't know. I mean, when you're writing nonfiction, you're really trying to capture like what a person is really like. The beauty of writing fiction is that you have a snippet, at least how my process. Like, I have a piece of a character. The equation like played soccer and like sort of athlete who was curious and smart, and sort of like as it comes to it, as you write more and more dialogue and see like the character really does emerge. It really emerges for me, that effort to have, even though they don't get as much time as like your main character, particularly if it's first person, because only what Ali's telling you is all that you know, because it's all Ali knows. So Ali knows her niece not that great because she left and went to New York and went to graduate school in Germany, and like so she's rebuilding that relationship with her her nephew Devon and then Niquatia. So the challenge is just trying to use these like moments when she's alone with them and situations they're in and what they're into, in order for me so as a writer to give you a sense of these like full characters, even though I just only have the limitation of page and like acting or something. You just have the page and dialogue and descriptions of what they're doing, and so it's been a great job. I love my characters. You can tell, like I really like that. It's like they're not real people. I created them, but I really feel connected to the person.
It's very clear that you love your characters. It's beautiful. When I saw Naquacia's name, I was like, yes, very excited. But also like all of the characters that you write have autonomy, even the children, which I think people do uniquely well when they're in relationship with children and in ways that kind of disrupt the like hierarchy.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of big up that because this, in a sense, it's an intergenerational novel,
Absolutely.
And I would not have known that this was your first piece of fiction, in a lot of ways it's historical fiction, it feels to me. But I could not stop thinking about Toni K. Bambara. I could not stop thinking about. I was like, oh, if only she could read this book. I'm sure.
Yeah, that would have meeting Toni K. Bambara. So one of the novels that early on shaped me in terms of thinking about this book. It's a very different version of this. We're looking at the Atlanta Child movie, but is These Bones Are Not My Child. The Atlanta Chalmers is like the central horror in my life. And when I was sort of thinking about wanting to write a story about fear, right? And just, that's what led me to sort of Matthew Strong. And because I was like, what is, there's like horror movies and there's like, things that scare you that are not real. And then, but for me personally, and I was really into horror movies as a kid, so I was like getting scared all the time. But there was nothing as frightening than, so it's like 79, 80, so I was like maybe 7 or 8. Was the Atlanta Chalmers, because it was that moment where I was like, wow, like you could be killed because you were black. Like as a kid, I was like, wait, there's like someone, this is what they thought was, there was this like Ku Klux Klan was, trying to start a race war, and these kids who disappeared and their bodies were found, it was like 22 or something. People believed that it was actually racially motivated. And that fear, I mean, I was all the way in New York, but something my mom told me, which is really funny, I don't know, it's relatively recently. She was like, oh yeah, when my dad mentioned like going to school, like Morehouse, Atlanta, she's like, so you were like, no, never go to Atlanta. So I don't remember that, but it's sort of funny the way in which, these experiences haunt, sort of the haunting of Black communities. That I'm not sure if the sort of rest of the broader nation is aware, but I've met, sort of through this tour, people who said that too. But they were like, yeah, where everybody's like, yeah, no, that also. In fact, I had a driver take me, which I'm very fortunate, take me from Richmond to Martinsville. And this turns out this brother's from Brownsville. He's 48, he's a year with me, grew up in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And like when I brought it, he's like, yeah, no, I remember that. He's like, it was so horrifying. And yet, until this novel and talking about it, not many other people brought it up to me unless I sort of brought this up. And so it's, it's something that was really important to me, and thinking about intergenerational, how this sort of this experience has shaped a generation, and then it's the return of that, and this question, so this sort of question that I don't know, sort of those who sort of have children, like, do we allow that to prevent us from like exposing our kids to Alabama? And so I was asked to write an essay about my experience taking my daughter, who's 15, who was born when I started this novel, like that October. So like as this novel is 15, she's 15. The story, this essay I wrote was like, why I was afraid to take my daughter to Alabama. Really long title. And because a lot of it was this, so I took her this summer. We went down to search out these locations that were going to be in the novel, and I wanted to take photos of them, put together a little mini documentary about sort of my experience of going out, looking for some of the slaveholders in the places. And something I sort of had been wanting to do for a long time. Pandemic hit, and so now is the opportunity to. And I was really afraid. I was like, really, should I bring her with me? Traveling around the back roads of Alabama. And one of the things that happened, which I think was really telling, is I went and took my, before that was June, I took one of my mentors out, John Higginson, who retired from UMass and was one of my mentors. And I gave him a copy of the manuscript. I was like, I want to give him that. And it's another book I had published, and took him to lunch. And I told him about this trip, and he said to me, Ousmane, be careful going to Alabama. And I was like, and he said it again, he's like, yeah, I know, be careful going to Alabama, and John grew up in Chicago, you know what I mean? And so, this is what I don't know if people in the nation are aware, like that, Black people are, and particularly from the North, still have that sense, like, and so as I'm thinking about how this trip plan and bringing Imani, like, I was like, yeah, is this a good decision? Ultimately, it was absolutely the right decision. Walking around looking at plantation homes. She was my videographer. So she's like, Dad, don't hold. I'm like, hold. She's like, Dad, trust me, Dad. I got this. Like, you don't know nothing about video. Like, all I do is, and so Imani, so we went around, we looked for these places on the map that, a lot of which have changed a lot. People aren't aware that Birmingham was actually, going back to the historic fiction part, was actually not created until like 1870. And so it was a legion, and it really was an experience of seeing these like signs of the old place before it became Birmingham, like really sort of chasing the ghostly slaveholders. We went to some graves, these cemeteries to find where this one prominent slaveholder who, I used composite. I was not trying to, blow up any families, because people are still, Alabama, like, the families are still very much in politics and around, and I had no desire to like call anyone out or anything like that. And so my characters are composites, not real, but the history is real and the character real. But what was really interesting is that in the novel, the cemetery as a site is really important. But what it turns out is that the cemetery I was searching for actually got moved because they built like this highway, Bessemer Highway. And so this like really the wealthiest slaveholding family that had their own personal cemetery, they actually had to move the cemetery to a new location, right? Which is now on the side of this, like, it's not a highway, like a north highway, it's like a main throughway. And it's like the main throughway, you make a right, and there's like a weird gate, and I don't know what was behind there. And then there's like this old cemetery where they removed it with the other cemetery. And then next is like a used car spot with like stacks of cars. Like, so cars drive by, you're sort of standing in the cemetery, looking, so I was actually searching for the actual gravestones. And it was, I never actually found them because Imani was too freaked out. It was really freaky. And so we never did find this one particular stakeholder's gravesite, but we got lots of footage and we did find some great sites for all of it. So yeah, history is really important. And I think that we need to find a way back and start there, because in the county, Jefferson County, even though it wasn't a prominent slaveholding county, like that history has been erased from that county. There's almost no markers even acknowledging it. Instead, it's like civil rights movement celebration, so lots of it's to that. And there's almost been an erasure of the reality that slavery did exist, even though it wasn't prominent there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a very ghostly book too. Like, I was like, oh, I'm not into horror at all. No way, no how. But yeah, very like kind of Southern Gothic vibes. And I think also like one of the things that felt really powerful to me was both with These Bones Are Not My Child and this book, The Confessions of Matthew Strong, is that a lot of the work really was carried by Black women caring for and grieving with each other and trying to find. We're trying not to give you all spoilers. I'll just give this one, which is the grandmother. She hosts these like luncheons and trainings basically for Black women who have lost their children and they're like disappeared Black girls and Black women. And her grandchildren don't know anything about this. And so like the grandmother is like really like very pivotal in kind of opening up all of this that has been happening for the last forever really, but also like the last 50 or so years in the book. And even like when they find the girls and women, it's really led by, it's not like the police, you know, it's not the FBI, it's really like these folks in the community who are like, we cannot rely on the state to like do this work for us, and we know our folks best. And why was that important for you to outline?
Well, so several reasons. I mean, one, Tony K. is, you know, novel, which is, you know, it's a very, you know, Toni Morrison worked very hard to actually, because Tony K. passed away, and Toni Morrison, as the editor, she is left with the task of actually bringing it to life, you know, so really like allowing it to get published. Because what Toni K. had done was she had gone around and spent a tremendous amount of time with these families in Atlanta to write this novel. Like, she really saw this, and so I'm writing in that tradition where it's like, you know, the novelist as the constant voice of a community, trying to capture experiences the media misses, like what it's actually like as a family, like what people go through. And so she had a massive manuscript, as Toni Morrison describes, sort of in interviews later. It was tough for her because of the fact that she really wanted to capture all the dynamics and switching perspectives of the sort of family. So it wasn't, and so I say that because, you know, my novel, this is actually, you know, a novel about Black families and Black community coming together when there's an existential threat. You know, when there's the thing that's going to destroy the world and tear you apart, the biggest fear. You know, this novel is about how Black communities come together. That's not sensational. That's true. That's just like rooted in the study of history. You know, Black women have, you know, led and you know, been pivotal members of communities that have tried to deal with either racial terror or activism historically. And so for me to have that part of the piece, that's just how it's always been. And you know, there's a thing that my professor used to say, and of course I say to my students now, you know, in the 60s, you know, the newspaper people would go to the men, but everyone knew Miss Johnson ran this whole entire thing. Like, there was no question of who actually was running, you know, the event, the movement, the activism. It was just that the news reporters didn't know. You know, they would go to the minister, you know, Miss is gonna talk. So, oh yeah, well, we're doing this, they narrate what's happening. But everyone knew Miss Johnson was locking it down. And so that's just understanding Black tradition. You know what I mean? You know, and not even a homage, just trying to be accurate, you know, actually, as opposed to being inaccurate and, you know, about it. So
absolutely. I agree 100%. We're gonna open it up to questions now.
Yeah.
That feels good too. Okay, great. Thank y'all for being here. Of course I have 1,000 things I want to say about this book, but
we'll bring them in.
Please buy this book. It is amazing, and make sure your library has it as well.
Thanks.
All right, folks have questions?
Yeah, what do you guys think? I'm curious about. Yes.
Hi, congratulations, Ousmane and Dr. Greene. And thank you so much, Amber. What wonderful introduction. I have not read the book yet, and I'm looking forward to it. I have two questions, and they're sort of disparate, but not really. The first question is, what would be your top 3 recommendations or suggestions for teaching this text, particularly in, let's say, first and second year undergraduate? What would be some of the things the instructor might want to do to ground the text? And then the second question has to do with how would you contextualize this text for an international audience, particularly now that we have this, as they say, this reckoning that's taking place.
I'm just going to repeat the questions just so the audience can hear from Zoom or video, whatever it's called. So I think the questions are, the first question is, what are like 3 foundational texts that folks should read, especially for first and secondary school teaching?
Or just teaching methods.
Oh, teaching method.
For undergraduate students.
Okay.
So like, what kinds of things, practical things could the instructor have students do? Especially now that we're in this sort of massive amnesia. And I'm speaking as a teacher, so whatever you might recommend.
No, and I just want to make sure that so you mean if they were to teach this, like how they would, Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's what I thought. I just want to make sure. So there's a few ways in. I mean, I think that a course on African American literature that wanted to bring it up to the contemporary moment. I think this would be like the last book that I would teach in a series of works that looked at, either Black activism or one that attempted to look. I teach a course on violence and African American social political movements, and so in my course, I would teach this, towards the end because it's contemporary work, but as Professor Kevin Kwashi pointed out when I was brilliant Professor Kwashi at Brown, because there's a lot of intertextuality in the book, I think that instructors would find a reward in that sense. In other words, you see the Harriet Jathos quotes, you see, if you're teaching African American literature and you're teaching, you see these texts that would make students curious, or that they've read previously. There's Baldwin quotes, there are works that are in there and they're woven in that I believe a person would find value in sort of the classroom. So those would be some of the ways I would see it. So I'd see it at the end. In terms of scaffolding, I think that the benefit of a work that you do for 15 years is the fact that you're able, when you're revising it, to really think about questions people have in a contemporary moment, right? So in this case, as the book evolved, as I began building out the story in Birmingham, one of the realities to monuments and memorials and taking them down. And so many college campuses have gone through this, secondary schools, and in the novel, becomes a major part of the motivation of Devon and what his the Black Student Union and Black Student Group is trying to do and their activism. And so I think for a teacher, an essay, for example, if you weren't in a place that had a controversy like that, reading about Charlottesville obviously is the one that made it famous. But reading about, right now in Massachusetts, there's a commission that's established to change the flag because there's a racist image, with this, sort of colonial person with a actual machete or a sword over the head of indigenous people, which no one noticed. I used to bring it up in my classmates. Yo, look at your phones. I'd be like, look at the flag. I can do talks. I talk about my memorials and my lecture stuff. They'd be like, oh shoot. And it's like by the sword, what's the quote in Latin? It's something like, we bring peace and by the sword or something like that in Latin. So right now, Massachusetts is reckoning with that. So if I was an instructor, I would have my students read about any contemporary issue on campuses to sort of think about that. Because when they get in the novel, they're going to sort of find themselves thrust into this debate because it's part of a true reckoning at the Lynn Memorial. It's a real reckoning over in Birmingham. So it's that actually I decided to go with stuff that's really happening as opposed to a fictive situation in Birmingham. So I would have them read some of that, and then I'm giving a talk tomorrow about. So it's titled "Writing Wrongs." So that's like thinking about anti-Klan, anti-racist literature. And so I think that students would, reading an essay perhaps, because if it's a literature course or other course, that gave people a sense of the long tradition of Black American writers writing back. Great example during the Harlem Renaissance era is Walter White, who's not really, known as like a novelist. He's an activist. I investigate lynching, which is he goes undercover. It's the Deep South. He's really light skinned, he has blonde hair, blue eyes, and he's able to go and like track down these lynchings and like interview these people. They think he's white. And so he writes a novel called Fire in the Flint. And so there is a long tradition of Black American writers that are engaging in racial violence, the Klan and things. And so I think that, again, sort of scaffolding with other writings, James Baldwin's, oh my gosh, I'm such a teacher, y'all. It's like one question, I'm like 25 minutes later. Any all that, come email me. I'll send you out some of this and listen to these books. Sorry, the bibliography. But the international audience, I give these talks. When I travel abroad, I always search out for examples of African American social and political movements on walls, monuments, and things. And so one of what we've learned, what I've learned traveling abroad, is the significance of Black American freedom struggles and writers to people abroad. And so, given the sort of nature of this text, these stories, the history it's involved, I think that the international folk, people either who are here or abroad teaching the book will find it to be very helpful and very interesting because of the history that it goes over, because it does intersect with a lot of those histories. Like I said, Harry Jacobs to Ball and to others. So yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. And actually, it made me think more. Like, okay, I need to write down these texts because tomorrow someone's going to ask me that, and so I need to make sure I have them. So I'm not like wandering like I am now. So yeah, other thoughts, reflections? Yeah.
Congrats, first and foremost.
Thank you.
I wonder if you could talk about the genre a little bit, touch on it a bit. Historical fiction as a genre, what has it offered you? What do you feel like the benefits are, limitations maybe?
Yeah.
And I also want to ask a little bit about, that's one, you've written a lot of nonfiction and long, successful academic background. I'm curious what has been most meaningful and what's been most surprising for you in terms of historical fiction. Obviously, it's 15 years going, so it's coursed through much of your academic career. But what's the most meaningful, what's the most surprising to you in the process of fiction?
Do you want to repeat that?
I'll try.
I'm like,
Those are two really good questions.
The first one was about the genre.
Yes.
Yeah.
Benefits and limitations.
The first one is about the genre, historical fiction, the benefits and limitations that you may have experienced with that. And then the second one,
More about the shift towards fiction after
Yeah.
coming from an academic writing background. What's been meaningful about it? What's been surprising?
So it's sort of like influences of and thinking about the intersections of writing nonfiction, historical work, and fiction writing. So I talk about I'll start with that question. So for me, writing historical work and writing fiction are the opposite. They're like the opposite process for me. So when I'm working on the history books, and I've been fortunate and I have a book that I just finished that I turned into my editor in September. Thank you. It was sister book, my first book. It looks at Black Americans who decided to join the colonization movement and to go to Liberia. And so it looks at that and looks at Liberia's history and sort of the emergence of that. I am in a situation as a sort of scholar I'm given these pieces of information, a letter, and I'm left with the task of providing coherence for all of you, right? We don't, most people, unless you're super into history, particularly local history, because some people who are into local history or retired and really good at history, really don't have the opportunity to go to archives and to go to digital archives and sort of look at this pile of information and then attempt to make coherence. So I am sort of professionally and part of my moral imperative to bring back the lives of Black people, is to come out of that archive and be like, all right, I looked through the 20 boxes. This is what you should read. It's only 300 pages, not 12,000 documents, etc. And so for me, the challenge is making choices about what stories I tell in historical work and how I create the illusion in some sense of coherence, because our lives are not good. If you go into any of our rooms, you open our desk drawer, our glove compartment, right? And you see the things that are in there. Maybe I'm showing myself. There'd be a lot of information, a lot of content, but someone else has to come and explain where I was, why I was, what was the value, what I was doing, and when I was reading that book that's on the floor that I can't find, or that article I'm trying to teach that it's up my car. And so that's what the historian does. So that process is really one of bringing things together. But there is a tremendous amount of creativity in it, and that's a big myth. I mean, writing in the humanities, science is very creative. You really have to engage your mind in certain sorts of ways. On the other hand, when I'm writing fiction, that process is really one of emergence. So I see my stories pretty much beginning to end, like whole cloth. But it's almost like a dream. You wake up and you're like, things happened. I'm not exactly sure like what it meant, what the ending was, but it was just sort of snippets of it. And so for me, I have to go within myself to figure out coherence. What is that voice? I hear voices. And like, why is this character so important? Like, what exactly is happening? And that is a very internal process, a process of internal discovery. And no one can really, I mean, people can ask me questions, that's really helpful. But I don't know, I mean, I sort of know why I'm writing what I'm writing, but I'm not necessarily sure, like, where it's going to go. And that's what's exciting too. And so there is no, oh, how do you do both? It is really authentically two opposite processes in some ways, but both tap into that creative side. I was a fiction writer first. My dream, I'm living the dream.
Yeah.
This is it today. Like, the novel is born in the world and people can buy it at retail. Fourth grade, the story was, it's called My Worst Day Ever, and I sent it in. The young authors and illustrators, young authors, young illustrators, and I was selected. And I went to this conference. And I met Judy Bloom, and she gave a session, and Alan Arkin gave a session on nonfiction. And I was in fourth grade, and I was like, yeah, this is what I love. And I grew up with a family of writers. My dad was a poet and wrote screenplays, and so I've always wanted to write fiction. And so writing nonfiction, sort of historical, was much more of sort of what my just not having the courage to be a fiction writer. In all honesty, but I love it, and I'm really glad I did it. But anyway, so those are really long answers. What was the other question? Genre. So I think genre is fascinating. Like, I very rarely choose books because of genre. I usually choose them because somebody said it's really good or it's something by someone I like. I had to learn genre actually. Like, afterwards, I was pitching to my agents. Like, what is it? Is it a thriller? Is it mystery? I had to like run downstairs and like look up like, mystery. Because I got slammed. I went to this, like, it was like one of my first opportunities, and it was like quick, like 10 minutes to the agent. And she was like really mean. she was like really cold and mean. She was like, what is it? So I like went downstairs, like, have a look up what it is. So it's really interesting with genre because and then with this, when they said historical, I was like, oh God, please no, I'm already a historian. Like, no one's gonna read this. But as it turns out, people like historical fiction. I was like, okay. Because usually when I think about historical fiction is it's a novel about a real person. Like, World War II, like Leningrad. Like, and so for me, when people were saying it was historical fiction, I was like, okay, like it's historical, and but so for me, that genre, I guess it works, but because in that sense, but then the thing is like, oh, is it a thriller? Is it? I picked the pace up. That was a conscious choice that I decided to do, and that's what allows something to be a thriller. It's not, a lot of it's just sort of editing and really thinking. Yeah, a lot of it's like, as my, oh my God, my agent's gonna kill me. So Sarah will be like, and move on. It's like 3 pages, don't need it. She's like, and move on. Like, because when it started getting really deep into like some, story, sub-story, the description, it was like, I bust my butt, like writing this like really like gothic South. And she's just like, yeah, this is like going way too deep. Like, let's keep it moving. That's sort of somewhat of the difference, this pace. And I tried to get it right because I did, and one of the reasons why I was really supportive of that was because I didn't want it to have a broader audience. And I had this dream that my brother would, I was like, I'm gonna write this so my brother will read it. Like, that was the bar. I was like, this is gonna be so engaging that my brother will read it. And, okay, I might have shot a little too high. I gave it to him and he read it, of course. So I was like, yeah, it's good. Let's talk about it, whatever. He reads all the time, but just fiction is not a way he finds pleasure. Like, he just doesn't, that's not something he enjoys. So I didn't get it that fast, but the pace is one that hopefully people who find themselves sometimes getting, they want the sort of beauty of the landscape, and they want to really feel connected, and they like long historical backstories. Hopefully they'll still be satisfied with how much I give of that. But ultimately, I do think that it does have a thrilling pace, but also it's sort of a trick because it is a lot of philosophy in there and a lot of history. And so, yeah, that's what I think about the sort of genre. It's interesting. I think it was reviewed in the New York Times, which is obviously the dream writer. And the reviewer got it right. She's like, genre bending, blending of genres. I was like, yeah, that's exactly it because of that aspect, which is not great for sales and putting it on wherever the shelves. But for people, I think they'll find perhaps there's enough history to keep it interesting and enough pace to make it move, and enough Gothic qualities where you're like, I think this is. I mean, there's house and graveyards, and so those are like Gothic literature, 19th century literature, southern landscapes. There's moments when Allie will describe the landscape, and that's the telltale side for those who aren't sort of aware of what exactly Southern Gothic, ghosts, hauntings, inheritance. These are all what make up Southern Gothic, and that's all in the novel. So that's very much where it started. So
yeah, it's an amazing novel, and you will learn lots too. Like I was like, had to write notes. Be like, okay, I think that's 20K Bambara. Okay, yes. Okay, Asada Shakur.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's congratulations.
One of the funny things when so people keep saying like, it's provocative, and I was like, and maybe it's because of the people I hang around with. I guess it. I mean, yeah, it's probably. But one of the things that, and I don't know what your thoughts are about the provocative thing, but I literally keep getting asked like, oh, is this a really provocative novel? So I guess some people aren't aware that Columbia University used to be it's like named after Christopher Columbus. But that was like an example. So it's like, it's really provocative. The name of the university is Christopher Columbus University. And I'm like, I wonder where I got that name from. You don't need to take. So there's like moments like that where I'm like, I guess I'm being provocative, but hopefully we're aware that most things are called Columbia are named after Christopher Columbus. And if you're like Northampton or maybe San Francisco, I know LA went to Indigenous People Day, not Columbus Day. You're a part of the majority of us who, embrace the critique of Christopher Columbus. And so I think we need to call it out, and, I'll be quiet now because I don't want to be super political, but yeah, we're in San Francisco, so why not?
Do it.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's the politics of that and the provocative tag, I guess. But is there other stuff there where you're like, oh wow, it's like really provocative?
I mean, I don't usually say that word just because I'm always like, because people say interesting, and I'm like, what does that mean? What does it mean to be provocative? Like, what's under that? I think one of the things that I felt really, really impacted by was that there's not really a reconciliation. Like as a reader, as a writer, I think sometimes people jump to the reconciliation. Like, okay, all of these bad things happen.
Yeah.
How will people feel good again? Shakespeare, like his stuff. But I actually felt like it just felt real.
Yeah.
There were for me, any fantastical elements. And I think I just really appreciated that. Like it's a book that'll stick with you.
Yeah. And it's funny you said it because like, I don't know if I'm like over the fear I felt like, you think about reconciliation, right? Like part of the process of going to Alabama. I mean, one of the goals I have, and I really want to step up and do this, is to reconnect with that side of my family because, the circumstances of my grandmother and the family leaving were like under very dire circumstances. And so that piece of our family just sort of disappeared. Like we don't have any connection with our Alabama family at all. And so when it comes to reconciliation, it's definitely one of those processes of being like, it's real. Like sometimes things happen and they're not reconciled in a way that's clear. And Allie's writing back like a year later, so there is some distance, but I don't know if the story's over. Someone asked me, I was like, yeah, I don't even know if the story's over. It's not. She's telling us now, and she's sort of like figured out a way to make sense of it, and she's attempting to narrate. She's ready to talk, but I don't know. She's not like, it's not over like life, right? So yeah, it's so interesting you said that. I agree as I reflect on that I had no like artsy like intention. Like I'm gonna write a piece where it's like, bam, it just like not really. It just was the reality of like the ending point and how it ends, and you know, in my story that I had pretty much the whole story. You know what I mean? And so yeah, I'm not sure what. Yeah, reconciliation.
Reconciliation is so complicated. So I just appreciate that you lay out the complexities and still navigate them.
Other questions? I don't know how we're doing on time, or thoughts or reflections? Yeah.
I have
Jody?
a question. I'm
Yeah.
just curious, like, you spent a long time with this book, and I'm just wondering through the time, like, how you kind of kept yourself on track with really where you wanted to go and
Yeah.
didn't get sort of, or if that happened, or what that process was like.
Yeah. So really, I was just trying to think of. So I think it's just community. I think that I was fortunate enough to find a community of writers who, you know, Dan Georgiakis, you know, 80-year-old anarchist, left writer and thinker who, you know, was working on a novel. He actually passed away last year, and so sadly he doesn't get a chance to. But we used to meet on his kitchen table, and also Ernie Brill, San Francisco strike state, you know, retired teacher, writer, poet, provocateur in any situation where you can like get on somebody. So they were like the first family of intellectuals and writers who I sat with and really shared the work with. And their feedback, their support for the project in this first iteration was really, really important to keeping me sort of on track with the value of it. Because, you know, sometimes you can want something to be born and come into the world just so bad that, you know, you just like throw it out there, and they helped me see the value of it and help me, you know, think through some of the creative problems I have, even through different iterations, you know, as I sort of rewrote it and built out the South. And, you know, they read other drafts of the entire manuscript, and Dan was like, yeah, no, I like the first version, which is like the artsy version. Like it was like pastiche, and like he's like, yeah, I still kind of like the first version, but yeah, this is good too. And so, you know, I kept on track because of the community that I find I was able to be vulnerable to people and share the work with. Because, you know, for me, and you know, I think there are many more of me who have a novel on the desk drawer and who just aren't able to find themselves to really try to get it born. And for me, I only was able to make that happen by allowing myself to be vulnerable and sharing it with a community of people who, you know, got to know me. I didn't know Dan Georgiakis before, you know, and just sort of got to know me and then recognized what I was trying to do and really supported that process. Because through the process, it is shy. And then I was able to trust, you know, I was able to get an agent. And, you know, if you're paired well with the agent, what they are, unlike like other agents, other fields, like in literary agents are like your first real fan you don't know, who like read it like, oh my gosh, this is really interesting, and wow, like, yo, let's talk about it. And she had like 12 pages of notes. It was like, I have these notes, you know, that, you know, if you sign on with me, and you know, I can't wait to work with you. And so that also kept me on track in 2017, 2018, when I sort of had a professional who saw the value of it. And then my publisher, you know, Judith Gurwitch and other press, the team there, who acquired the novel in, you know, 2020. So it's been a couple of years, and they kept me on track as it's coming to completion. Because, you know, when you're fortunate and you decide to trust other professionals who also believe in the vision of the book, you know, they are, and this is the best scenario, which I had. They are able to keep you focused on what you believe you're trying to do with it. So a lot of the early process talking about the project before they sort of they read it. And so because of that, you know, since 2016, 17 to now, it kept me on track. And then all of you, you know, sort of, you know, I haven't seen them in a long time, but, you know, my family and friends, you know, Raphael read an early version. They keep you on track because, you know, before this moment, there is no sense it's ever had happened. Like, there is no sense that it ever will be born. Like, you know, you just are like, you know, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people, you know, who are, you know, across the globe, who have stories and write stories, but they just are, you know, fortunately don't have a community or just can't bring themselves to, you know, to share it I mean, I was getting out when I was in Martinsville, Virginia, for example. I got picked up at the hotel by this cab driver. They don't have cabs in Martinsville, which is really cool. I was like, oh, like, can I just take an Uber? And he's like, oh, something laughing. Like an Uber? And I was like, oh, okay. And but this woman came and she picked me up. She had her own cab company. It was awesome. And she was a poet. It's a Black woman. She's like, oh, that's so great. Like, you're going to read. She's like, oh, I'm a poet. We started talking. And she was like, oh yeah, like, I'm like, just this year, I'm like hoping to finish this book and publish it. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, that's so great. I gave her my call. I was like, oh, let's, definitely like link up. And so you meet people all the time when you're a writer. You say you're a writer, who also are writers. It's such a huge writer community. And if you are fortunate enough to like have it born and like have people bring it to the world, that's what keeps you on track. And it was really hard for me. That's why 15 years. Not like I was like pondering. It was just the fear, fear of people reading my work and criticizing it, and fear of it just not being able to succeed at the voice, the technique, like having a female character. There's just so many aspects you fear, and all you can do is just trust, your community and be with people like that. And so, another very long answer. Obviously, I've been wanting to answer this question for a really long time, but I want to make sure I say that. I'm really glad you asked that question, Jody, because I just want to debunk any myth people have, about like the solo author who just is banging their head against the wall by themselves trying to come to truth. It's like, I'm sure they exist. I don't know any people like that. You know what I mean? And I certainly am not a person that's had that experience. So hopefully my other 3 novels will get published one day.
Yes, they will. Thank y'all so much.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Can we have one more hand for Ousmane? Deeply appreciative of you both for sharing your time and talent, and for your thoughtful and engaged questions, and for taking time to write this novel, and for sharing it with us here on its birthday. So we have copies of the Confessions of Matthew Strong available at front. You can find them there. I think, is it safe to assume you'd be willing to sign
Oh yeah.
copies?
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Please make yourselves comfortable. We have other books too, if you want to take a look.
I'm looking. I'm coming at you.
And we'll see you all next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.